graduation requirements.
So this will be the first time we'll discuss this. So I think we want to do this in chunks, Ms. Lindquist and Dr. Freitas. But the Curriculum and Instruction Advisory Council has met 2 or 3 times since last spring to discuss graduation requirements. And our current graduation requirements are set at 22, but we do have some specific classes that are unique to Riverside Brookfield High School. And historically, over the last 8 to 10 years, we've worked to try to remove some of those classes that are unique just to RB, so that students, we don't want to necessarily lower graduation requirements, but we want to provide students the opportunities to have more choice. I think Ms. Zalis brought up the example of the kid who's pursuing the top 10, but also may have a passion for, music or rock band or something like that. They might not be able to take it because it might impact their rank. And so that's kind of the same approach we took with the graduation requirements. Is we were discussing how can we create more opportunities for students to have choice in the classes they're choosing to take, instead of having some of these specific courses. And so that's kind of how this is geared tonight, our presentation, and I'll let the Assistant Principal of Curriculum Instruction start off by covering that proposal.
You did a pretty good job. No, not to be dangerous. You pretty much covered it.
This is pass.
Well, I think you can get into the specific courses.
We work.
Sure.
We work together.
We looked at specifically in the graduation requirements previously the cultural and applied studies section, where there was courses listed like fine arts survey or like global area studies, where they were under the guise of electives, but they were kind of forced electives in the way that students needed to be able to take these specific courses, again, like Dr. Skinkis said, that are RB specific in order to be able to graduate. And so rather than take away graduation requirements, to Ms. Haruska's point, when we look at where a school was ranked and, where they're ranked today, and if there's any discrepancy there, we certainly don't want to make it appear that we are lowering standards, that we would take graduation requirements away. But again, to Dr. Skinkis's point, there's been a really big push in education in the last 5 years especially for kids to be able to explore what interests them, and for them specifically to be able to potentially get a head start on what they do when they leave high school, right? Can they get into an internship experience? Can they get into dual credit experiences? And we've done a lot of that work at RB that's been really great to give kids open doors in those ways for kids to discover what they're good at and really pursue that passion. And so when we look at altering graduation requirements and removing those constraints, we're looking at being able to give a student an opportunity to take whatever it is they want to take without us dictating to them what we feel their curriculum should be. So if I'm a student and I fall in love with science my freshman year, and I want to make sure that before I leave RB, I'm able to take all of the courses, anatomy and phys, AP biology, applied zoology, courses that excite me, that I'm interested in, computer science discoveries. We want students to be able to pursue those paths without us telling them they have to be constrained into a box. And so that's what this change would do, is to eliminate some of those somewhat arbitrary requirements that RB has imposed that don't necessarily exist in other schools. We modeled this after many of the schools that we looked at to see what their graduation requirements look like. There often are a section of electives that students have freedom of choice in. There are very few schools that I was able to find, if any, if I'm remembering correctly, where beyond what the state requires, the English, the social studies, the science, those core requirements, schools dictate that a student must take a B or C class unless, for example, it's an intervention class and a student needs that to support their programming or what have you. What we wanted to do, however, also when we look at graduation requirements is try to be a little bit more upfront about what graduation credit requirements mean. And this was actually something that came from Ms. Haruska, and I love this idea of really giving students a clear picture of, if I want to do X after I leave RB, this is the kind of rigorous coursework that I need to include. So the chart at the bottom of this document is new, wherein not only do we highlight what the state graduation requirements are, and as you can see in the blue column, RB is well above what the state requires students to take, but we added a column for community college programs, vocational schools, a column for four-year colleges and universities, and then a column for those highly selective colleges and universities. Because if I'm a student and I want to go to Harvard, while RB doesn't tell me that I have to take 2, 3, maybe even 4 years of a world language, Harvard is going to expect me to have taken that. And so we want to be really upfront with students in terms of, these are your minimum requirements, yes, but here is what other schools are looking for as you progress into the various programs that you might be interested in taking. So that's why there's an addition of a new chart there. But again, the changes to the graduation requirements for this proposal are simply to remove any constraints and truly give students an opportunity to select whatever program they feel is most appropriate for their future plans.
Kylie, you provided a lot of supporting documents, just makes, I'm sure the board's looked through this already. But
Oh, yes, I did.
we're in comparison with all the top 10 traditional high schools as well as districts with high schools similar size.
Yes, so when I initially came to the board on this, I included the top 10 schools, some of the schools that we look to compare ourselves to in terms of what credits they require. And then I also, after Dr. Skinkus provided me with the list of districts with a similar high school to Illinois, I was able to go through those and take a look at where their graduation requirements fall. Again, this is just bolstering the argument that we do not want to reduce graduation requirements. If you take a look, I would say that we are competitive in the area. There's certainly, some of the schools that are hitting that 24 credit requirement certainly, have more rigorous graduation requirements. The schools that I highlighted in yellow are the only ones that I could find that were lower than a 22. And there's actually, and certainly not to belabor the last conversation, but there's a couple of schools, as you'll notice there, that if a student earns additional credits, they get what's called an honors diploma. So that's one example of a way that students might recognize somebody that's a high achiever. Proviso calls it graduation with distinction, right? So there's lots of different ways that we could even use this type of data to help carve out something, for those top achievers. But I wanted to be able to show kind of where we sit in not only the top 10 high school discussion, but in the schools that are very similar to RB in size and offerings.
Kylie, is your recommendation then that bottom chart in blue is just keep it in general? So culture and applied studies, I know we had worked on a different chart, I'm not sure if it's in.
We kept it labeled just because those are when you look at all of the things that fall under that, guys, those are cultural and applied studies, and we have then the additional electives. So in cultural and applied studies, we talked at one point about, the liberal arts education, right? We do want to encourage our students to explore culture in whatever way that means and whatever way that makes sense to us. So rather than just saying to students, we want you to take 5 electives, we do want to make sure, we feel responsible to enrich our students culturally. So that's why we kept that distinction there and separated it out.
Where are the world languages?
On the cultural and applied studies.
Okay. So then that would be consistent with your 4-year colleges and,
Yeah.
okay. And again, my premise always is this is minimum threshold. Any student can take more classes if it fits. They can take 7 classes times 4. I mean, nobody's limiting a student from taking an elective.
Correct.
So
And
that
so-
needs to be clear.
You're recommending that this would go, if the board discusses it again to the next meeting, you would like no later action to be taken than the first meeting of October, correct, Beth?
Correct.
Because then the curriculum guide goes out in mid-October, late
Correct.
October, and students start picking classes early November.
Correct.
This change, so basically the 2 classes that are primarily impacted are Fine Arts Survey and Global Area Studies, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
And so those classes, that would start with the incoming freshmen, Or are you looking to implement this? How are we looking to implement this?
I would, sorry, go ahead.
Go
Beth.
ahead.
I would be looking to implement it now. Because we're talking about students and giving them, opening up their opportunities and removing their constraints, to me, that's not a harm to students, so that's not something that I would be asking to wait 3 years on. It would be my preference to be able to open up that opportunity for students now.
Beth, your recommendation align with that?
You can say if it doesn't.
No.
It's okay to say no to Kylie.
No,
He does it
it's not.
all
I'm
the
gonna
time.
say, that rarely happens.
I just want to make sure, so will there be pushback, or, I mean, is there ways for students to get out of this requirement? Some students may have taken it, some students may have not. They still have to complete a credit in that designated area,
Correct.
Correct.
right? Because here's what's going to happen. If it's not tonight, tomorrow, or the next meeting, the board's going to be the ones getting the emails from the parent of, hey, you eliminated this, my child would have never took it, she would have taken this, or he would have taken. So I just want to make sure we're vetting this as, publicly as possible, as being as transparent as possible, so that when we make a decision on the recommendation of the administration, we're not getting pounded with emails of that we didn't do it right. So that's why I want to make sure we're all on the same page.
I just want to ask, would seniors be affected by this who have the graduation requirements from before? If you're opening it now for seniors, how is that
It
going?
would only start with juniors picking classes for their
okay.
senior year.
Right, would it impact the class of 2021?
I have a super minor technical question, but I see on the Illinois State required courses, PE has 4, and we're only offering 3.5.
That's because one semester is health,
Health.
and that's allowed under the state code.
I see.
And the Illinois State Code does physical education really oddly. They don't actually require the credit to graduate. They just want you enrolled
Enrolled.
in
Yes.
PE
Yes.
for the 4 consecutive years, but we are able to do the 3.5 because of health.
Right.
It's not a state graduation requirement, and the state only requires a student take PE 3 days a week for 4 years. So, I mean, there's some things you could adjust if we wanted to do that down the line.
They like to write
But
funny
it's,
things down.
well,
there.
yeah, it just doesn't make
Springfield.
sense on how they implemented that credit, or that mandate.
That was
Requirement.
that was a give and take situation, right? Like that's somebody thinking that that was a win for something. I mean, you'd probably have to go down the rabbit hole to figure out where that stupid thing came from.
How would you even do that, just 3 days?
Well, we're talking about Springfield here, so.
Are there any questions for the administration? I think you addressed it in your presentation, and 1 or 2 that may have been submitted. Is there information the board needs to see at the September COW in order to discuss this at more length, or feel comfortable taking action at the September COW if there's not much discussion tonight?
We're not ready to vote on this?
There's always an opportunity for the board to vote on this tonight.
Sorry, I guess I was in on the curriculum committee discussion, so I feel like we've been talking about this for a long time.
We have.
And I just want to say, I know like we went in sort of with one possibility in mind, but I'm really happy with the way that it all, like we kind of came together and worked it all out and talked a lot about what do we believe about this school and graduation requirements and rigor and some of the other, things we've talked about tonight, like PE waivers and class rank kind of came into this discussion as well at some points during it. And I mean, I think that I went into it, and I guess the reason that I am happy is because I went into it with the thought that now, again, we would be talking about, and I've told you this before, but I'm saying it for everyone, right? Like it would have to be a highly motivated kid, like our 2 friends here in the end. But in essence, one of our students could drop out at 16 and say, this place isn't working for me, but they could give themselves a world-class education online for free and then go be a coder at the age of 18 and make $200,000 a year if they wanted to. I mean, again, that would be a highly motivated kid, but that can happen. Like, that's a real scenario, whereas 20, 30 years ago, or whenever these classes were thought up to be on the course schedule, that wasn't a possibility. That wasn't a thing, right? So we were trying to give them a very well-rounded education, and I still believe in giving our kids a well-rounded education, but I think that they can they have the ability to specialize so much in everything that they do, in their sports, in their academics, in their clubs, in their, whatever it is that they do, that this was the right move.
So a full-time student is required to take 5 classes a semester, correct?
Correct.
So if they did 5, the minimum at 4 years, they'd have 20 credits. By 22, they could still graduate early if they wanted to graduate early in their senior year, have 22 credits. Be
Yep.
more than, it looks to be more than comparable for a 4-year university.
Yes.
So I guess my question is more process. I think you brought tonight some really good suggestions, the world history, the world literature. I think those are moving us in the right direction to a broader perspective for some of these. What's your cadence to look at all of the areas and kind of review curriculum across the board, right? Are there enough variety of fine art options out there? What's getting used, what's not getting used? Do we have too many APs, not enough APs? Like, at what point are we looking at this more broadly and not as a couple of suggestions here and there? And who's involved in that?
Well, we do a review every year, correct? And we do look at classes, Beth will bring up classes that haven't run for several years, and we make a determination if they should be kind of like pulled from the books. And then we keep some on every year based on, like, if we always have 12 or 15 students sign up for one class, but it never gets to the minimal threshold to run, but we'll keep that on every year.
Right.
So we
Well, that's what I'm
do
I'm thinking of.
analysis of that every year around this process, course selection, and then throughout the spring as we're looking at course changes and curriculum guide changes, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, and I think some teacher feedback is part of that, which I'm assuming you get, and if you don't, I would
Well,
would
all the,
encourage you.
so all the courses
Right.
that you, like all the courses that we talked about tonight, those proposed changes, all came from teachers.
Okay,
So Sandy Chaika proposed the computer science
okay.
course
Right,
because
because
Sandy
they're going to
Chaika
be
is
close enough to
computer
the
science,
students to
right?
say, this is something I know needs to be done. And then that's what I
Yes.
wanted to hear. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so it's, we as a building have the leadership council, which is the building administration plus the instructional coaches. And that is where kind of those beginning conversations start happening, where we talk about, in an AP literature class, I have Wendy Cassens looking over syllabi because she wants to make sure that our students are reading a diverse perspective, that there are female authors, that there's a multicultural lens. So that's kind of something that our instructional coaches, as their department leaders, are kind of doing all the time. And then once a year, we bring the big group together for a kind of more formalized conversation around what changes and what tweaks do we need to make. And that's sort of where that outgrowth comes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Smithy, it's up to you if you'd like to have us bring this back for more discussion, for the board to digest this, or if you'd like to take action.
Straw poll, do we think we need more time for discussion? I do not.
I don't.
In this thing. All right. Mona,
Get to read the resolution.
see if you can find it.
The Board of Education Township High School District 208, Cook County, Illinois hereby approves the modifications to the current graduation requirement as presented in the September 8th, 2020 board agenda packet.
Second.
Second by Mr. Jacobs.
All right. This is,
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
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 Thank you, ladies.
Resolution. Let's
Have a good
go on.
evening.
Thank you.
I know she was
Thank you,
excited to
Patty.
come
Thank you,
back
Beth.
next 2 weeks, but find something else for her to come back.
Yeah, right now you don't have to come back, Kylie, in 2 weeks. Notice how he's,
Or Beth?
right now.
What about Beth?
You're okay right now. Right now. Notice I always leave it open.
We'll find something.